the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And your business can only grow to the extent that you do as a person. So if you don't have communication skills in your personal life, you ain't definitely gonna be able to have them in your business life.
Yeah. Welcome, y'all, to the Rare One podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Today, we're going to be talking about salon ownership from the perspective of like what to expect. And for those who are aspiring salon owners, and or if you're already an existing salon owner, we believe this conversation will help you. So my name is Essence China.
I'm Adelaide Good.
And yeah, let's get into it.
All right. So, okay. What would you say was your, I know this might start a little heavy, so just bear with us. What would you say was your like hardest moment as an owner?
Hardest moment?
Yeah.
I think overall, the hardest part about salon ownership is managing people.
Yeah.
And not really realizing, like, when you get into business and when you're doing hair, you don't really think that that's where the bulk of your issues will come from.
Yeah.
But that's where it does come from. If you're managing people, if you're, you have stylists and receptionists and they have lives, and their lives can affect them showing up at work. And how do you manage that from a leadership perspective? Yeah. And from a stylist perspective, they don't even have a clue of the weight and the responsibility of that. And so I guess to go deeper into that, it's just, just certain scenarios. I mean, honestly, I have quite a few of them. I remember the very first time I had to let a stylist go.
Yeah. It
was so hard for me. And it was hard because, it was not my first, but it was like the first person I had to let go. But they were for reasons where it was just like the integrity was not there. Yeah. They were lying. They were, just doing things that were just completely outside of, policies or what have you. And so there was a violation, but there was still just a fear for me even dealing with it. And then even when I had that conversation on the other side of it, I felt so torn.
Yeah.
And I did not even anticipate that as a salon owner and having to make those decisions and how those decisions would affect me. So obviously you have like the practical side of it. It's like this stylist is doing all of these clients, and what am I going to do with the aftermath of how do I now manage these clients if I don't even have a place to put them? You know what I mean? So there's that side of things, but then there's also even the mental and emotional side of things. Or how does it even look? What about what people ask? You know what I'm saying? Where are they at? And, dealing with that aspect of it. So I would say, I think the very first time I had to let somebody go was very hard on both sides, on the front and the back. And then as time went on, and we're talking about, over a decade of employing stylists, so I had to let, quite a few go. It was more so just actually having the conversation and knowing when to have that conversation and making sure that I had extended a certain amount of grace. Yeah. And now it's like, you no longer need to be here,
Yeah, that's so good. I was just communicating earlier, and I know we recently talked about this too. It's like understanding the difference between grace and boundaries. Like if those two don't do a good enough dance, you're going to feel like, oh my gosh, am I being mean or did they cross the line and I have to just enforce whatever that consequence is? Because then God can trust me with making decisions to move past the boundary so that we can continue to do the good work, do some good work. It's right. It's hard to sometimes know that difference.
Yeah, I think, and that's where I think company culture and having like a strict core value is really important, because then it's not you saying, oh, my feelings were hurt or I was violated, but it was more so you violated company policy, you violated company culture. And because of that, you've made the decision because you know what the culture is.
Yeah, we read this book, Traction, and I will never forget, in like the first couple of chapters, the author basically says you hire and fire on the same principles, the same factors. And so if you hire somebody for, you know, having integrity, if you hire them to be trustworthy, if you hire them to be, you know, just excellent stylists, you have to then enforce those consequences at the same rate if you have to fire them. Like, and it's hard. It's really hard to do that. But if they sign the contract, you know, well, they agreed.
Right. And I think that's the biggest thing. When you allow people to essentially, like when you onboard them, you're letting them know this is the culture. So then there's no question as far as, oh, did I cross a line? Because we've already agreed upon this. Like we've taken you through the process of who we are as a company. What is it the expectations are? And so if you cross it at that point, it's your choice. It's a choice. You know? And I think that I definitely struggled with, dang, am I being petty? Like I didn't necessarily know what that line is, especially now with social media where, you know, stylists, you know, they have already their own brand. And so they've come into your company and they've already like branded themselves. Well, the type of business that we are, you know what I mean? Like there may be a certain culture that certain things, it's not necessarily saying that we don't want you to be able to succeed, but we're a team. Yeah. And how do we now draw that line of delineation of like, okay, this is acceptable and this may be a conflict of interest. Yeah.
And I think from a leadership perspective too, it's like some of those things you don't automatically know until you get to a place where it might conflict with your values or with your company. And so then it's just a matter of communication. It's like, are you going to communicate it up front and as early as possible? Or are you going to wait until it starts to bleed over into and start to affect your business? It's really hard to make that delineation especially if you just don't know yet.
Yeah. And I think that that's the one thing about business is like it's on the job training. Like some things people can't necessarily, they can't necessarily prepare you for. You kind of just have to be in it and then maybe have counsel to help you walk through it. 100%. And that's why I love coaching because 100%. It's like, you know, as soon as, you know, a stylist comes to me or a salon owner comes to me and tells me, hey, this is what I'm dealing with my business. You know, how would you recommend? It's because we've been there before, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I love it. Okay.
What about you? I mean, you didn't answer it.
That's
I mean,
true.
what's since you stepped into ownership and partnership, like what has been one of the hardest things that you had to deal with?
I would absolutely say, aside from managing people, it is, for me, it was like trying to find a balance between being kind and being firm. In my communication, because I had a history of like, oh gosh, Lay's gonna just say what it not just in the salon but in general, like Lay's gonna say what's on her mind. She don't care how it comes out. But then I started caring. Like I don't want it to be poorly received because I can't communicate it in a way that can be received. Like if you yelling at me, I'm 9 times out of 10 I'm going to hear you, but it might take me a longer time to process it because my feelings are going to be just hurt off the jump versus like, let me learn how to communicate kindly, but very clearly and keep my word. Yes. So that if I communicate something to you, not only am I demonstrating that, but I'm going to be very clear to say, we had this conversation and this is just a natural consequence of it. To where you can just receive that. I don't need to yell at you. I don't need to cuss you out. Right. But I had to really, really learn how to be firm and be kind and be clear. And because of my age, having stylists that were older than me, really learning to make sure that my communication was on point, because for them it could feel like, which, you know, they'd make comments, not all the time, of like, I never thought I'd have a boss younger than me type thing. And I'm like, well, wait, I'm not trying to come at you no type of way. It's just, I have to still be clear in the communication and the expectations of what I have to steward. So really just learning that dance and trying not to use my age as like a factor that will disqualify me from being able to have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think leadership is leadership. I don't think it really has anything to do with the age. I think it has to do with good decision making. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, that's it's a funny thing because it's like, how do you know when it's time for a stylist to maybe make that decision, and you're maybe thinking about, well, if I let them go, what are they going to do financially, or they have kids, or they like, how do you even go there? One thing I have to say before I even go there is communication and then documentation.
Yes, 100%. And I tell them I document every time.
Why is documentation important? And then we'll come back to that other point.
I really believe in receipts. Mm-hmm. One, because I know people lie. People just gonna do it, period.
Or forget.
Oh my God.
Conveniently.
Natural, like you just had amnesia for 2 seconds. No. I'm a document, and then I'm gonna reiterate back to you what you just said to me. So I'm very clear on what your statement was.
Right.
But I want to have evidence, and not just to protect me, but also to protect you. So if I maybe forget something, randomly, I want to make sure that our communication was just super clear, and I keep that documentation. Mm-hmm. Anytime I have a conversation with anybody, and they know that I'm doing it, but I also want them to get in a habit of like understanding that that's happening. So, this is a lesson for them too.
Right.
But yeah, that documentation is absolutely necessary.
So for an aspiring salon owner and or existing salon owner, mm-hmm. they hear documentation and they may be thinking, what exactly do you mean by documentation?
Yeah.
So there's a certain infraction that takes place.
Yeah.
Now I'm having a conversation with this person, and I may be putting them on maybe even a probationary period, or, like, what exactly does that documentation look like? Because I know you love documentation.
Oh my gosh, it's like music to my ears. I believe in order, like into my core. And I believe that if we do have like that evidence, it just eliminates another process outside of our mind. Mm-hmm. And so if somebody comes in and they do have an infraction, and it doesn't always have to be an infraction, it could just be a conversation that we know we need to have, mm-hmm. then I'm making sure that I'm taking notes on the conversation, and I'm asking them to pause while I'm taking those notes to make sure that I'm really clear on what they're saying and clear on what I'm communicating and expecting for them to do. I'm making sure the date is on there. I'm making sure the time is even on there. Like, we had a meeting on February 14th at 9:15 a.m. about X, Y, and Z. It's that clear. Mm-hmm. So if anything were to ever happen and Essence needed to take over for whatever, she knows exactly what's going on.
That's good.
But I'm taking notes on what they're saying. I'm taking notes on so not just the issue, but then what's our next step?
What's the plan?
Mm-hmm. You have 90 days to do this, and there will be a review period. What's the date of the review period? So the other person is in expectation that there's going to be a time that there's going to be a revision process of whatever we talked about. Mm-hmm. And so just making sure we have those things, like, as an owner, again, it not only protects you, but it just puts you in a place where your mind doesn't have to be so consumed and ruminate over something.
That's good.
That, like, you can just let be before you have to revisit.
Okay, now I want to go to a million different places. But in my mind, it's like, and this is something I've been learning in my own personal life. It's like, I need to close this tab.
Yes.
Like, I got too much other things I need to be thinking about or dealing with. And so when you have things, because sometimes I'll even come back and be like, okay, so when did that happen? So we can go back to a date. But if there was no documentation, like, well, I think maybe about 2 months ago, she missed 5 days and, gave me an excuse or whatever the case may be. Yeah. So I definitely feel like documentation, this could be a word for a stylist or a salon owner right now, to like really start getting on your documentation, not keeping receipts for the sake of like, oh, you did this, but just for your own, personal habit. I think it's great just in your personal life and in your professional life.
And sometimes even if you don't necessarily have a full conversation with that person and you notice something, like if you have a dress code and you notice that maybe one of your stylists just has been out of dress code at least 3 or 4 times, you need to know that, because then that can feel like a violation to you, that they don't honor your code or your conduct or whatever it is, and you keep track of those things. Doesn't mean, again, you're going to always have to have a conversation with them, but just keeping track of, oh, they're out of dress code again. Just make a note of it. Make sure the date. So then if you do need to ever go back and you can be like, oh, they were out of code like 5-6 times. And are you just not honoring whatever our policy is type thing, you know? So,
what do you think about that from the standpoint of like when you don't say address certain things, like how that can even set a pattern for the rest of the team to follow? It's like, we say we have these standards. We say this is our culture. However, we're kind of letting something slide, maybe because of our inability or maybe our insecurity to have the conversation. And so there's passive aggressiveness or there's just avoidance.
Yes.
What would you say to that?
Good. That's so good. I think as a leader, sometimes you don't even know to look at certain things until you are there. But I've noticed that if I don't address something essentially immediately, it's going to irritate me throughout the day. So not only I'm checking myself first. Yeah. Am I even upholding the standard that's bothering me? And so like, I don't expect my team to do something that I'm not willing to do.
Right.
If that makes sense. So if we say that we have a code of, it could be dress code. I just want to use something light.
Yeah.
If we say we have a code and I come in out of code, like, I'm still not following the same rule that I implemented. So it's really harder. It's harder for me to enforce something that I'm not doing. So it's one, checking myself first.
Right.
But two, it shifts the entire culture. It then gives permission to other stylists or other people who come into our environment and say, oh, she let that slide. What can I get away with? And this is subconsciously. It's not like somebody's coming in trying to be devious looking for an opportunity to infiltrate like whatever's going on. But it starts to give permission to do other smaller things like, oh, I saw that they were 10 minutes late and there was no consequence. And it's not to say that there has to be an outward consequence, like you got to yell at that person, but it is, okay, I noticed that you've been late a couple of times. I need to speak to you for a second. And even if that's like, that could feel like too much for somebody, but sometimes it's just making it a priority to address it as soon as it happens so that you're not giving way for you to be passive aggressive to them and for them to think that, oh, I got away with this. And so let me see what else I can like try to get away with. Again, it's not like super outward or conscious that somebody's doing this, but it starts to shift the culture a little bit.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned yelling, and we know we never yell, but you know, there may be some salon owners that maybe have not found that line of like, how do I communicate? Because I feel so violated. Like, how do I communicate with heart, but also, and I know we just spoke about that, but I think like it's really just keeping in mind like we're leaders and we're building leaders, you know, for those who really want to, because a lot of stylists who are even working in your salon may have the dream to open their own salon. So how are you setting the example and setting the tone for them? And I think it's I hate to say it like this, but it's setting standards and having structure is a lot like parenting. You know what I mean? And even though I'm not a parent, but just understanding it's like, people really like, they value structure even though they don't necessarily like it. You know, because it actually makes everything flow much more freely. But I think that, you know, having those conversations are just, you know, so key.
And if
having
you
those standards.
practice having those conversations, like one, we super encourage you, get a coach if you need to, learn how to communicate better because it's going to make you a better leader. And two, making sure that like you're checking your responses immediately. If you feel violated for any reason, like, why does this violate me so much? Really getting an understanding of like, why does this hurt my feelings? Why am I ruminating about this? Like, is it something deeper so that you don't respond with an unnecessary reaction because of something that it's not that big, but it can turn into something bigger because it's hitting a different nerve. Again, it's always going back to how are you responding or reacting so that one, you can be a better leader. Because as Essence was saying, not only are they watching, then you start giving permissions to other stylists in their future because they had a glimpse of how you handled a situation. You
know, it's funny because I think about, you know, a lot of times like when we have the conversation about what's going on in the salon and there's this point where it's like, I know it's kind of time for them to go, but not necessarily knowing like, okay, like how to go about it, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I always ask you a question. If the salon was staffed, would you keep them?
Yeah.
And the reason why I ask that is sometimes we put up with things because we feel like, not to say that we need, but so it's like, okay, I'm gonna accept this bad behavior. I don't want to say it like that, but we accept this because at least we have that. At least they are a good stylist. At least they are taking care of clients and getting things done, even though what they're doing is not necessarily affecting their practical tactical work, but it's affecting everything else.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
How do you, when I ask you those questions, like, how do you, process that?
Okay, realistically, like in the last 5 years, having to navigate that, I think that's honestly been one of the hardest things for me to do, because as you mentioned earlier from our first question, like what is the hardest thing about being an owner? One of the hardest things for me is I do really care. Like I had to learn how to care. Because
you had to learn?
I had to learn how to care. I really did. I wasn't that good. I'm not about to lie to y'all. I was not that good.
But this is your job.
Right.
This is your job. Yeah.
I knew that being in leadership, and learning how to serve and lead at the same time, there was a well that had to be dug in me to like really care, but knowing how to care correctly. And caring correctly is I can care about the things that do affect you while you're in the salon, and contribute to how you show up and all those things. But I also can't control how you respond to certain things. So if it's a natural consequence and God is saying, okay, it's time for their release, he's going to take care of you. You had to teach me that. Like he is going to take care of them. Like that's not your job. Your job is to steward and care about the things that pertain to when they're here and why they're here, but you can't control all the other things. And I really took that burden of responsibility. Like I had to factor in, oh my gosh, if they have kids, if they have this, if they have that, and you're like, that's God's job. That's not your job.
Right.
And so it was, I do care, but I also have to know when to release. If I don't know when to release, I'm going to be holding on to something or someone past its time, where you've mentioned before, if the grace has left, now you just dealing with a problem. Right. But yeah, just learning how to release in the right time. And that has taken a lot of prayer. It's taken a lot of counsel. It's taken a lot of courage.
Come on now.
It has taken a lot of courage. And sometimes I can't hide the fact that I'm emotional. And it does genuinely hurt me when I have to make some decisions, especially if there's been no like huge thing that like automatically eliminates them. If it's just like God said it's time, and I'm like, dang, Lord, what again? No, like it hurts me to my core. But I also know that if I'm not obedient, I'm not making room for the person that he has to come that's going to take us even a little bit higher.
If you are looking to achieve flawless styles like this right here, these parts, they're just crisp, we're getting through it, you need to order you a pack of our precision parting combs. What they're going to help you do is to braid and to part with speed and with ease. Many times stylists are losing time because they're parting over and over again. They're second guessing themselves because maybe the tools they're working with aren't the best. So we want to help you with that. Go ahead and go to rareessenceacademy.com/combs and get your precision parting combs. Now back to our podcast.
And on top of that, you may be stopping the process that he wants to do. And on top of that, the other thing is this, it's like, in certain circumstances, you're rewarding bad behavior by allowing whatever may be taking place. Because the reality is when you get out into, other environments, they're not having it at all. You know what I'm saying? There is no grace.
I know, they don't
There
care.
is no grace. So we're not talking about like, okay, you just doing something to where it's like, okay, you cross the line or whatever. But it's more so like, okay, this is time after time after time. At some point, do you want to grow as a stylist? And growing as a stylist is not just growing in your hairstyling. It's growing in every area of your life. Well, when it comes to working at Rare Essence, you know what I'm saying? It may not be like that for every salon, but I think that I would implore salon owners to recognize that they're looking at you not consciously, but from a holistic standpoint. They see you. And
so
so I think that it's just really important that you just maintain that standard for yourself. And yeah.
It's hard to ask for clients. I mean, not clients. It's hard to ask your team to communicate if you don't communicate. It's hard to ask them to be transparent to a certain level because you guys are in such an intimate environment. If you're not transparent in what you're, not only what you're dealing with, and it's not to say you need to tell all your business all the time, but there are things that directly affect your team. If you don't communicate them, like it's just going to spill over, And so it's really, again, making sure, like, are we upholding those same values consistently? How can I ask them to have integrity if I'm not demonstrating integrity? And it's not easy to do all the time. Sometimes you just like, I'm tired today. Like, I don't want to do this. But it's like, no, if I don't do this, I'm setting a bad example. And I could inadvertently, again, be giving them permission to be like, I could chill on that.
What's so funny is like, so when I opened the Tempe location and when that happened, it was just me and you at first at that location. So Glendale was staffed. And so I'm like, okay, Adelaide, and at first I was going to send you and another stylist to go open that location. And I felt God was like, no, it's you're supposed to go over there. So anyway, when we went over there, it was funny because we were talking about transparency and vulnerability. And it was like, I don't even know how to make this make sense, but it was almost like God was working through you to cause me to learn how to be more transparent and more vulnerable, because my idea of salon ownership at that time was just like, you kind of work, you do hair, and you know what I'm saying, you get paid, like everything is good. But there was like this working that he was doing, and some of it, don't get me wrong, was because of this covenant relationship that we had, right? But it also was too to help me to grow as a leader, because there was a requirement of that transparency and vulnerability. And I didn't know how to communicate, even 10 years into business. I mean, things were functioning, at a good level, but they were still like, okay, but you still have growth in this area. And he used you to do that,
Thanks. It was, I don't know. Whenever we share our story, and this is for really anybody listening, like whenever we share our story, we know without a shadow of a doubt it was God before it was us trying to force anything. And so any of those times where I did feel like, okay, Essence, like, you want me to work with you and help like manage things, but I don't know how to do those things necessarily. Like, you have to let me in a little bit, because I have to know what the vision is. I have to know what the full expectation is. Like, you can say certain things, but like to me, I needed it like written out a little bit clearer. And so it was really just making sure that I was handling your baby with the right amount of care. That means I had to ask certain questions to make sure that I got the full scope of, right. And it took a long time, y'all. Okay. It took a long, we 17 years in.
Listen,
but
in my mind, not to cut you, but it was like, you don't see where we going. Like, right. I mean, it's obvious. Like, right. Not to say that, I didn't feel that I didn't need to communicate, but it just wasn't something that came natural to me. And my thing is like, you see the growth, you see the traction. So let's go, you know, and your thing is the way that God has engineered you. It's like, okay, I need to see things in a different way, which caused me to grow in areas that I didn't necessarily know at the time know how to. Yeah. But it was, I also want to say it was from a business perspective, but it was also in a personal perspective too, because the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And your business can only grow to the extent that you do as a person. So if you don't have communication skills in your personal life, you ain't definitely gonna be able to have them in your business life, So
it's that would be fake if you decided. It's inconsistency in character. If you decided like, oh, I'm gonna just be this way in business and at home I'm just a complete different person. That's incongruent, So it was us learning those in real time. And now it's just like, they say, oh yeah, separate business and personal. It's like, no, they affect each other. They genuinely affect each other. And we've learned it like in real time that whatever is going on in your personal life and you show up to the salon, it's going to bleed over into whatever you're doing. If you pissy because you had a fight or an argument with your friend or your spouse or whatever it is, and you come in with an attitude, you think that's not going to affect your client and or your team because they don't think you got an attitude with them.
Yeah.
Instead of having the courage really to communicate, I'm really having a rough morning. Can you, like, I just need a couple minutes, like, to get myself together so I can show up better, versus I'm just going to come in, keep an attitude, and then let it just bleed, and then be wondering why somebody getting snappy, you know?
Right.
Like, it's just learning the dance of those things, I think, help to not only create an environment where somebody can still go through life. Like, you can still experience life. You're going to experience hurt. You're going to experience grief. You're not going to be 100% every single day. But if you can learn the rhythm of, like, let me just learn to communicate safely to somebody. And we all know everybody is not safe. But let me learn the rhythm of communicating safely so that I can still work through things and be a productive part of our team.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
But I have an answer too.
Please do both.
But I was going to ask, like, what do you feel like is a cheat code in business? And my answer to that is God.
100%.
And the reason being, it's like, you know, for us being faith driven, being purpose driven, like, we know what we're doing is not just to be doing it. You know, it's the path that he has truly set us on. And so if he set us on that path, he also is guiding, orchestrating. He has a plan for all of it. And so, you know, even before we do this podcast, we pray. Before we have a staff meeting, we pray. Before we have a business meeting, we pray, because we really want God's will to be done within this in this business because it's his, right? Yeah. And so I think that for those who are, you know, I don't know where you stand in your spiritual life or with your faith, but I really feel like if you cultivate that relationship and you give it back to him, he's going to direct and orchestrate and guide you in ways that you would have never. So now here it is. What do I tell you when it's like, or when you come to me and say, well, this is going on? I'm like,
pray.
Girl, you
need to pray. You need to get some peace. And then be patient, really, to just, like, wait to hear something.
Right. And it's not to say that I'm not giving wisdom. Yeah. I'm giving wisdom, but ultimately it's the prayer that's going to give you the peace.
Yeah. Yeah.
To make whatever decision.
That is established in relationship. That's established in consistency. So it's not like you can only pray about your business or about what are you consistent in that in your real life, in your It's as we were talking about, like, everything is going to blend together. If you're doing that in your real life, it's just going to flow into your business. I was just speaking to my manager at the salon this morning, and, you know, we pray all the time, but she's like, while I was out on maternity leave, she was like, do you think it's a good idea if we have the team come in about 15 minutes earlier and we pray together? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, it's changed the game, like, completely, that they set a whole nother intention on how they do things, on how they, like, to pray out loud requires courage, but to practice it every single day when you come to
build
work,
a muscle.
It's like, I've seen them grow exponentially because of that implementation. But I think that when we do set that tone, when we are super consistent in that, it has the ability to change everything, and it has. I don't know how else to describe it. Like, it genuinely has. It exposes things about us, and not necessarily just about each other in a bad way.
Right.
But it makes you show up a little bit differently, because now you know somebody is, one, praying on your behalf, and two, the whole environment will shift.
Because you're inviting
God in. The whole environment is shift. Your ability to work with your client, all of that changes when you just incorporate God into the fact. I mean, into the equation. For us, like, when we realize that it's a factor that will never leave what we do, I feel like it changed our trajectory.
Yeah.
We were just like, oh, wait, no, faith is a part of who we are. But then we're like, faith is going to be in the fabric of everything we do.
Right. And it's funny because I've heard people say, I've never even thought to bring that into my business. And I'm like, I don't know any other way to do it. Like, the reason I'm on this path is because of a word I got. Yeah. And therefore, I have to continue, you know, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word.
Yep.
So it means I'm getting this word and I'm living like, I'm moving based off of that.
And
so
we see clients' lives change we've had clients, they're like, oh, I want to start journaling. I want to start therapy because I heard this sermon in the salon, or I want to, their walk shifts, their walk changes because they also see the fruit in the salon too, with how we're interacting and with us being even a little more transparent with them about the things that God is doing in our lives. Like just not omitting that factor is bigger than us just doing hair.
Right.
It's changed everything. So that's 100% cheat code. I don't know if there's another one. It's 100% the cheat code.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, prayer and not omitting him is everything. Okay, so this is a good one. And I know it's been a long time since you stepped into this role. But what would you say was your idea of being a salon owner before you became a salon owner? And how is that a little bit, different now?
I think, me getting into salon ownership, I was so young. I didn't really have it's going to be this or it's going to be that. I had worked in a barbershop prior to opening a salon, and I also had worked in a salon before owning a salon. But I don't necessarily, because I had been doing hair so long, it was almost like a seamless transition from going from my apartment into the storefront. Yeah. And even though I went into a storefront, it was still just me. Right. And so a lot of that salon ownership responsibilities, aside from, overhead and all the other stuff, didn't come until I really started employing people and I was being called to, do things differently. But one thing I can say is that prior to opening the salon, I didn't understand that what God was doing was calling me to help people transform. Yeah. But I could not help people transform without my own transformation. Mm-hmm. And so through that process, he was transforming me. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that, okay, I'm modeling something that's causing people to either, follow suit and or essentially say that this is not the path that I'm trying to go on, right? Yeah. And so salon ownership for me, I always say it's leadership, but our mantle or mandate is really to help people transform. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's not such a, how do I say this? A weighty responsibility, because I think it's a byproduct of us doing what we're called to do. Mm-hmm. But through it, we see the transformation. And so for me, it was I just seen it at first I saw it as just a business. Yeah. Okay, I'm opening a business. Mm-hmm. Now I understand my assignment.
Yes, that's so good. That is so, so good. Mine is definitely so different. I never saw myself. I never, ever saw myself as a salon owner until you popped that question one day. You're like, well, what do you think about owning it? I'm like, I don't. I never thought about owning it. But I realized shortly after you'd asked. So for everybody, a little bit of backstory. I was managing the salon while I was in college, and then God was like, no, you're not going to grad school. This is a very short version. No, you're not going to grad school after I graduated, and it was really, really difficult for me. There was no plan whatsoever to still own anything. I was just like, okay, well, I'm going to do hair. I'm going to give it everything I got. And then at that time, we had, Essence had just started Rare Stylist Academy. And so then we started recording, we started traveling the whole nine. And then she had asked what I thought about salon ownership. And so then it was okay, now I have an invitation to think along those lines. But it didn't cross my mind because I didn't know if I was going to be doing hair, Mm-hmm. But when it did, I remember having multiple conversations. You were saying, basically, you won't know until you know. Mm-hmm. And sometimes Essence could be vague, and she loves to throw me in the water. I always say, like,
I'm just poetic.
She just
You gotta read between the lines.
She like throw me in the water, but she knows that's the best way I learn. But it hurts real deep sometimes. 'Cause I'm just like, I don't know how to swim right here. She like, yeah, you do. You got it. But I always say, like, even when I was young, she always saw something in me that I didn't see in myself at all. Like that, the whole role of even salon ownership, she saw qualities in me that essentially like would later qualify me. But
I
it
like
was,
that.
thank you.
I might have to use that one.
That felt good. But they later qualified me, but it was the diligence in continuing to work those qualities that put me in a position to like be able to swim at some point. It was like, yeah, you don't fully know how to manage people, but you know how to have conversation. Like you don't fully know how to run a salon, but you know how to create operations. You know how to organize. And so it was just, again, like being able to transition those things into a role. But I also knew how to ask for help. I also was like humble enough to be like,
yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing. One, God, please help me. Because unfortunately it was at a time where your father had just passed, and so you didn't have the capacity, and I knew you didn't have the capacity. So I had to just learn it and like figure those things out. And it was really, really hard for those first few years. But when I look back, it was God's way of saying, I have to develop you without a crutch, without the dependency and the voice of Essence going through your head over my voice. And it was like he separated me for a time, and it hurt because I'm just like, but my sister is like grieving, and I'm like, I don't want to burden you with all the things that I was like trying to navigate, but I knew you still again didn't have the capacity. And so he took me through like that pruning season, to where I had to really just give it to him. I had to be fully dependent on him. But I wasn't prepared in the sense of, I know what to fully expect in ownership, because I didn't understand the perspective until I had to walk in it. And I also knew that it was a space where then you could trust me, because now I had some
grit in the game. Yeah.
I had some daggone grit. I went through some things that I could only do on the job.
Right.
And so for anybody who's even aspiring to be a salon owner, there's going to be a period of time you're just not going to know what to do. And you're either going to have to be humble to ask for help. You're going to have to just work through it, because sometimes it's just for you to be able to get wisdom. Everybody just can't give you wisdom all the time for every little thing. There are things that you're going to just genuinely have to work through. And to be able to be still enough to hear God's voice for what he is calling you to that thing.
Right.
So yes, he established Rare Essence, and you established Rare Essence, but there was a way that he needed me to carry it that only he could tell me.
Right.
And for you to be able to trust that I'm going to be able to do it. You know?
Right.
So that, I know that was a little lengthy of a response, but yeah, I had no clue. And now I'm so grateful that I not only went through that full experience, but now God put in my heart the same vision to help people transform. It's like now we get to really carry this mantle together, because now it's in my heart. It's not just in my mind no more. Like, it's just Essence vision. He's like, no, you get to carry it together. And so it's like, Essence, you stuck with me for life, literally, because that was his deposit. That was.
But we knew that before
Yeah.
that even came about. But, you know, I knew that it was going to be, you know, something that you were going to have to grow through and learn through. But, you know, some of it was just like, you've been here. Like, I mean, it ain't that hard. Not to say it ain't that hard in my mind, but I knew you were capable. And I think that when people are thinking about being a salon owner, they really have to just gauge like their capacity and their capability, because you do have to give it, for a better part, your all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that, sometimes stylists or salon owners, they could be divided and they don't understand why things are not necessarily growing, but it's causing you to grow in order to grow your organization. And so your standards, your values, like all of those things have to be checked. Like you can't say that your value is something when your life is saying something else. Yeah. If you value timeliness, which I feel like clients will respect you for and even pay you even more for it because of how you show up, then I show up at a particular time because this is what I value. So it's not what you say, it's what you actually do. Yeah. And so, I think that if stylists or salon owners are looking for, I'm not quite sure what my core values are, but look at your life. And if you want those to change, then start looking at, okay, what do you actually want to exemplify and start exemplifying those things. But, and it's not to dissuade or discourage. It's just to say that it is a weight of responsibility and, just being kind of level headed and stepping into that because it's not a glamorous thing just to be like, oh, okay, I'm a business owner and, I got this many stylists and whatever. Yeah. Like, that's more responsibility.
Yeah. And if anything, it humbles you to a greater degree because you know that for me, it's like other people's lives depend on me showing up consistently for years. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, things are shifting a little bit now, but it's still other people's lives are depending on the work that we have to do. And so there is a difference in humility, not like, not just pride in I get to call myself this, but no, I get to grind through this role because I'm called to it. Like I have sacrificed so much for it. Both of us have. It's like, no, you're not automatically going to step and it's going to be all glamorous. And, like, if you really don't put your blood, sweat, and tears into it. And it requires that for a good amount of time. It's not just like, oh, I'm just going to have to grind for 6 months. No, like you have to put some sweat into it for you to really see some fruit. You think about a plant. You have to plant that. You got to toil the soil. Like, there's so much that you have to do to just create a good environment for the plant to even grow. Yeah. And then you'll see some fruit, but it's going to take a while.
It's just a season.
It's just a season. It's going to take a while. And if you're okay with whatever that work is, I think you'll be a little bit more prepared for what the real work.
And I think like. Too, one thing that we said, but we didn't necessarily say it like expressly, it's like, if you're called to it, and I hate this sound cliche or corny, but like he'll bring you through it. Like he will sustain you in it. And so if it's in your heart to be a salon owner or, what have you, it's because you do have the capacity, you do have the potential, And so I think that like we've seen so many people, even from Rare Essence, go off and start their own, and I think it's a beautiful thing. And so you got it.
We always say too, like he'll give you the grace for it.
Yeah.
If you're called to do this, you'll get the grace for it. Mm-hmm. And it's not to say that it's going to be easy, but there will be things that come with ease. Yeah. Because
it's a supernatural ease.
Yeah. Because you're graced to do it. It's a matter of tapping in at the right time. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of like submitting yourself enough to hear consistently so that it just flows, if that makes sense. Yeah. It's still hard, but it is, there's a different level of grace to it. I think, so the last question, and I hope this one doesn't take too long.
We might have to wait for another episode. We can go a little over. It's okay.
A little bit? Okay. So the last question that I think would be really, really helpful is how do you handle the transition of a stylist? Mm-hmm. Like just break it down a little bit. Like you've had an exponentially amount of experience handling transitions. I feel like I'm barely like in the water now. I've had enough in 5 years. But what does it mean to you when a stylist transitions? And just what share your process of what that
there's like. So many things to consider when you think about that. You got to think about the team. Yeah. You have to think about the clients. You know, you have to think about just overall operations. You know, if they held a role other than just being in the chair. You know, there's so many things to consider. I mean, first and foremost, I think when it comes to like a team, like you need to have that conversation with your team. And also too, like we have a standard and policy, like we don't talk. And what I mean by we don't talk, I know we're talking about communication, but when a stylist leaves and the client comes in and asks like, oh, where is such and such? It's a one sentence.
They're no longer here.
They're no longer here. And if they keep asking questions, there's nothing else that needs to be said. You know what I'm saying? It's like they're just no longer here. You know what I'm saying?
We're not sharing details, nothing, none of that.
and the reason why I felt like that is so important is because, I mean, unless somebody like up and moved away, you know what I mean? Like, but I feel like sometimes people are asking from a perspective of being messy or, you know, don't get me wrong. There is genuine concern and questions or what have you. But, you know, I just don't think that in business, like it needs to be like this long drawn out because then it can get into other things that are just unnecessary.
Yep.
And so I think that being able to manage the team and helping them know, like, this is the protocol for how we discuss when somebody, you know, transitions or what have you. So I think that that's big. And then also, too, you know, if they service a certain, you know, group of clients, you know, just letting them know, like, you know, we do have this other stylist to service you. You know, for the most part, all the stylists do all the same services. So it's just like, okay, we can get you in with this stylist. But, you know, and at that point, it's up to the client if they want to go into somebody else's chair. I do find that, at least at Rare Essence, people love the stylist, but they also love the culture. They love the vibe. And so they're like, I'm Rare Essence for life. Like, I mean, there's clients that have been in a lot of different chairs, but they're in those chairs because they also trust us. Yes. And they trust that we're not just throwing them to anybody. Like we train stylists, right? And so, you know, just having those conversations and then just that initial conversation with the stylist that is departing, you know, whatever it may be, whether they already let you know, like, okay, in 6 months I'm doing this or I'm making a move or whatever. So just having that conversation and talking about like what that transition process may even look like.
Yeah.
And they're all unique, so it's hard to really say like specific, but.
Right. But it's really, again, maintaining that confidentiality, making sure that we're communicating what our expectations are of your departure. And, you know, we're not breaching anything. So we have a whole system that, you know, we operate in. Don't go in the system getting people's numbers. Like that's just, that's going to hurt you in the long run, that kind of thing. And so really, making sure that communication is really clear. It can be really, really, really difficult, especially if they don't do anything like outright that like easily disqualifies
No, I'm smiling. But go ahead.
But it can also be super. Even communicating that, it is difficult, but it's also necessary, and wishing the best for them. It's not like some things are done in malice. Now, not every situation is handled perfectly, but I feel like every opportunity we get to do it better, I feel like we've done it better and better each time.
I think the biggest challenge is when people depart under deception. Yeah. And so there's probably only like, you know, a few, maybe really just one that it was just like, you didn't have to lie. Yeah. You know, you didn't have to lie. Like whatever you choose to do is fine. But now I've lost any level of respect because it was under this, to the point where we throwing you a party. Yeah. We throw you a going away party and to come to find out it was something completely different. And I think that when people operate in those type of ways, it's disheartening because it's like you didn't have to be deceptive, you know? Yeah.
And it doesn't always matter if you show up one way. You can't expect that everybody else is going to show up and or respond that same way. A lot of times you think, oh my gosh, if I let them go, are they going to drag my name in the mud, or are they going to listen to somebody else, someone else's opinion,
or
even
narrative,
that doesn't know, or their narrative, even if they don't even know me or what's going on or whatever the situation was. And so I think it's always going to come with that risk. But I promise you, like, if you be obedient, if God's telling you, okay, it's time for somebody to transition or release, one, be grateful that their time may be up because he might be preparing someone else that's better equipped for wherever you have to go next. But 2, he just might be setting them up to be able to succeed in their own way that they just couldn't with us.
Yeah.
And that's
True.
okay too.
Right.
But it's really about how you handle it, what your character says about how you handle certain things, especially those transitions. And so maybe it's a good time to reflect on, okay, if somebody did have to transition, how did I handle it? What can I do better? What's a better and more productive way to be able to do it? It's just not, I don't know. Maybe it's easy for some people. It's just super hard for me.
No, it's definitely challenging. And I think that, even as I knew that you were moving up in leadership, and that's, what God was pretty much orchestrating, it was like, okay, I have to start bringing you in on these conversations.
Yeah, that's good.
So even though, you're going to experience it on your, on your journey too, but now it's like, okay, let me give you a little bit more of an inside peek of what to expect with this, for accountability purposes, but also just for understanding the responsibility.
Yeah. It is a weighty responsibility. But yeah, I hope that helped bring a little more clarity into kind of a real preview. This is not even the full depths of what it means to own a salon, but we hope that it provided some level of like counsel or guidance to just kind of get an understanding of what the responsibility looks like.
Yeah. But again, if you're graced to do it, you're going to be good in it. And so we're excited for all the new salon owners that are going to be springing up. And we'll see you on the next episode. But thank you for joining us today.
Love y'all.
Peace.
Hey, Rare Stylists, if you are looking to grow in business and you know you need help, we want to help you. Log on to rareessenceacademy.com/coaching if you are ready and serious about growing in business.